World War I. Not a setting that's seen a great deal in the video game space, in part because it's among the least glamorous conflicts in human history. But this week, Ubisoft Montpellier kind of bucks that trend with Valiant Hearts: The Great War, which is a smallish, downloadable game that focuses on the individual people of World War I instead of on the combat. How does it fare? Here's our review. Valiant Hearts is an intriguing idea for a game, for sure. World War I is woefully underexplored territory in games, and an adventure game seems like maybe the perfect angle to explore it from. The game says it is, quote, freely inspired by the events of the Great War, but more specifically the story is built out of details taken from actual letters sent during World War I, woven together into an interconnected, multi-perspective story. You'll spend most of the game with 4 human characters. Emile, a French dairy farmer who's the first to get called into the war, Carl, the farmhand who fell in love with Emile's daughter, a deeply sympathetic accidental medic named Anna, and an American volunteer bent on revenge named Freddy. Each of the characters in Valiant Hearts has a context-sensitive ability, but largely they play exactly the same. Their value comes from the separate perspectives they bring on the war, not necessarily gameplay differences. And then of course there's the adorable dog companion, who joins each character at various points in the game and can be used to retrieve, distract, and otherwise solve puzzles. Because let's be clear, this is a puzzle game. Most of your time in Valiant Hearts will be spent solving various puzzles all over Western Europe in order to progress. Now, because World War I was not a war about puzzle solving, it shouldn't be surprising that many of these feel somewhat contrived. Some of the solutions feel especially convoluted and fetch-questy. One puzzle involves using a shower to steal some overalls to trade for a handkerchief so you can sneak into a barracks and then get a drug pipe that you trade for some meat to distract a dog to get into a room and steal some wire shears. So it gets pretty silly pretty quickly. Adding to that sense of absurdity is the fact that many of the puzzles involve the same small handful of items that you find in the world over and over. Apparently in the 1910s, Europe's economy revolved almost entirely around bundles of dynamite and levers, as most of the things you interact with in this world are one of those two things. Putting that aside though, the puzzles themselves are actually pretty good. With a couple of quirky exceptions, the puzzles are clever, well balanced, and exactly the right difficulty. There's also a decent multi-tiered hint system that drops clues on timed intervals whenever you get stuck, although oddly, the few times in the game I did find myself stumped, those sections just didn't have hints available at all. Weird. But enough about the puzzles. If you have any interest at all in Valiant Hearts, it's probably owed to the game's fantastic, eye-catching art style. Despite being functionally mute and practically faceless, the characters in this game are hugely expressive, thanks to some incredible 2D animation from the experts at Ubi Montpellier. The game's look strikes a delicate balance between the grim and the cartoony, and the narrative reflects that dichotomy perfectly. Often the game will pivot from something as playful as a musical driving sequence to arriving at the destination and discovering mountains of corpses and anguished, dying soldiers. These transitions from comedy to darkness happen on a dime and are actually a huge part of what gives Valiant Hearts the emotional weight that it occasionally carries.
She discovered the horrible truth with her own eyes.
And boy is it pretty! Generous use of layered parallax scrolling lend the game's backdrops a phenomenal sense of depth, and battlefield scenes wind up looking almost like gorgeous little living papercraft dioramas. The game also makes great use of a picture-in-picture trick we haven't really seen in this engine before, displaying gameplay-relevant or narratively relevant action that would otherwise be off-screen, an effect that actually adds a lot to an already very cinematic game. The game plays well within its limited color palette too, so when the splashes of color do come, they bring a distinct impact. Still, for all its visual impressiveness, Valiant Hearts is not quite as polished as the studio's 2 latest Rayman games. Occasionally, Ubisoft's reach exceeds their grasp a bit, and the camera comes a bit too close to certain elements, showing the limits of the art and/or the engine. Likewise, there are all sorts of small but noticeable graphical glitches in just about every stage of the game. Still, these hiccups are rarely game-breaking, and maybe it's not quite fair to hold a game of this size and price to the standards set by a full retail release like Rayman. The music, too, is great. Fantastic piano compositions by Ian Livingstone combined with soaring orchestral work and occasional upbeat period music all work together to give this game the exact vibe that it ought to have. The best stuff about the game's presentation occasionally trickles into the moment-to-moment gameplay, too. It's not all puzzles. Valiant Heart is also packed with some dramatic, almost action-y sequences that do a solid job of mixing up the monotony of lever puzzles. These diversions include quick-time events, stealth sections, and a couple of tank sequences that actually manage to feel pretty empowering. Ultimately though, Valiant Hearts, while competent, simply isn't the most fun game ever, but maybe that's okay. When you wrap beautiful graphics around a competent puzzle game and an interestingly told, if somewhat rote, war tale, Valiant Hearts pretty quickly starts to look like a very compelling package, especially for a meager $15. It's a game that, in its best moments, feels like playing a beautiful cinematic cartoon, and in its worst moments, still feels like playing a pretty decent puzzle game. Put differently, Valiant Hearts is a good but not great puzzle adventure elevated by its unique setting, great soundtrack, and above all, fantastic visual presentation. So yeah, that's what I thought of Valiant Hearts. It's a game that I think I wanted to like slightly more than I did, just because I want to see more games that play with these unusual settings, and I love the UbiArt engine as a sort of medium, but yeah. Hey, speaking of things that are sort of cartoons but aren't quite cartoons, I have a new show called Behind Anime Lines, where each week I bring on a guest and we talk about whatever anime we feel like discussing that week. It's over on the channel Fandabeat, but if you click on top of me or over on the side or something, you can see it. Last week we talked about Captain Earth. We've also talked about Attack on Titan, all sorts of different animes from any range of time. So yeah, let me know what you think of that show, and let me know what you think of Valiant Hearts. I'll be hanging out in the comments, answering your questions, and talking to you guys about it. But yeah, thanks for watching.